And when you think about Sunday school, just imagine in your minds or remember back, or just think back to Sunday school, what you perceive of Sunday school, maybe what you remember of Sunday school. Think what comes to mind, just activities, things that you did, things that other people do, things that are part of Sunday school. Just shout out a couple things. What makes Sunday school Sunday school? Snacks. Crafts. What else?
Giants ball game.
What'd you say?
Giants ball game.
Giants ball game.
Giants ball game.
Awesome. Hey, Sunday school teachers do cool things. What's that? What else?
Just to say, memorizing scripture.
Memorizing scripture. What's that?
Flannel board stories.
Flannel board. Oh my goodness, flannel board. There's anybody ever sing a song in Sunday school? Oh, music is so part of Sunday school. So much. Sunday school is not without music. And it's even better when it has hand motions to it. Because it makes it fun and exciting, and you love Jesus more because you do hand motions. So, we need a song. Now, this is a song where there are hand motions, and you can do them. You're welcome to stand or sit, however you like, because it can be done standing or sitting, no worries. But all you have to do is watch and follow along. Okay, ready? You have to promise me you'll follow along. Okay, ready? We're all going to do this. Okay, here we go.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Father Abraham, many sons that Father Abraham, I'm one of them, so are you. So let's all praise the Lord, right arm. Father Abraham, many sons that Father Abraham, I'm one of them, so are you. So let's all praise the Lord, right arm, left arm. Father Abraham, many sons that Father Abraham, I'm one of them, so are you. So let's all praise the Lord, left arm, right foot. Father Abraham, many sons that Father Abraham, I'm one of them, so are you. So let's all praise the Lord, right arm, right foot, left foot. Father Abraham, many sons that Father Abraham, I'm one of them, so are you. So let's all praise the Lord, right arm, left arm, right foot, left foot. Father Abraham, many sons that Father Abraham, I'm one of them, so are you. So let's all praise the Lord, right arm, right foot, left foot. Turn it up. Father Abraham, many sons that Father Abraham, I'm one of them, so are you. So let's all praise the Lord, right foot, left foot. Chin up, turn around, sit down.
Man, I'm glad nobody walked by in those 2 minutes. You get exercise at church too, it's amazing. So that song, Abraham, if you had a song written about you, there's got to be something behind that. You got to be somebody important. You got to be a big deal. And Abraham is. We got the big three, the founding fathers of our faith: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Abraham's the one that came first. He's the one that no Sunday school is complete without an Abraham story. It's like Abraham is part of all Sunday schools. The cool thing about Abraham, among other things, is that Abraham shows us what's involved in a relationship with God. Because Abraham is like the first one where we get a glimpse of his interaction with God. Certainly we had Adam and Eve and Noah and others that had some connection with God. But nowhere else until this point do we have these longer conversations, these back and forth interactions between God and this person. So Abraham is really one of these first people that we get a glimpse into what is a relationship with God involved? What does that look like? What does God hope for? And what do we get to do in this relationship? So we're gonna look at Abraham, and what is it about the relationship with God that we can learn from Abraham and how Abraham interacts with God? Now, Abraham was not always Abraham. A lot of these early chapters in Genesis, we read that his name is Abram, which always trips me up because I want to say Abraham, but it's Abram. At first, his name was Abram. God changed his name to Abraham, but they mean different things. Abram means exalted father, and Abraham means father of men. God changed Abraham's name when some things changed in his life and when God was doing something new. So when we see in these stories, in these scripture passages, the name Abram, now we know who we're talking about. Abram. This is early Abram, exalted father, Abram. So Abram's journey starts out when he is traveling. Abram's family had left home in their home city, and they had moved hundreds of miles from the city of Ur all the way up, and they were headed to Canaan. Canaan in the land of Israel that we're all familiar with from Old Testament stuff. But they left their home and they went partway to the city of Haran. They settled there, and that's where their dad left them. Their dad passed away. The father of the family passed away. So this is Abram, this is siblings, this is nephews and nieces, this is grandkids, this is livestock, this is whole extended family on the move. When Abram's father passes away, that's when the oldest son needs to step in and be in charge of the family. And that is Abram. God comes to Abram and says, Abram, you need to go to the land of Canaan. You need to finish the journey that your dad started. So Abram takes all of his people, his family, and his livestock and everybody and moves them a couple hundred miles further to the land of Canaan. Once Abram gets to this land, finally gets there, new home, totally different place, new people, new landscape, new everything, that's when God appears to Abram and God says some things to Abram. So here's what God says to him. God says, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. Pretty good promises, right? It's a series of 5, 6 promises that God gives to Abram about this great new thing that's going to happen. God is going to do this work. God is going to bless you in this new land. God's going to give it to your descendants. All these great new things that God is going to do. That's where the good news seems to stop for Abram. Because he arrives in the new land, he hears these good words, and then there's a famine in the land. And he and his family have to leave the land. They go down to Egypt. They head down there for a while to escape the famine. There's a whole mess with the Pharaoh and Abram's wife, and this whole mess where they end up getting escorted out of the country. They come back to Canaan, finally back to the land. Maybe things are being restored. Things are looking up. God appears to Abram again once they finally return. And here's what God says. Look as far as you can see in every direction, north and south, east and west. I am giving all this land as far as you can see to you and your descendants as a permanent possession. And I will give you so many descendants that like the dust of the earth, they cannot be counted. Go and walk through this land in the land in every direction, for I am giving it to you. The problem is there were people already living in the land. Abram's walking around seeing these people in the land, yet God says, I'm giving you the land and your descendants. You can go anywhere you want. And Abram's not seeing it because he can't go everywhere yet. Yet God is making all these promises. These promises about you're going to be innumerable, you're going to be blessed, you can have this land, your descendants will have it. Everything's going to be great, these people are going to be blessed through you, it's just going to be a joyful life. And Abram's like, but I can't go everywhere. I don't have the land. I don't have the descendants. how many children did Abram have at this point? 0. He had no kids. He and Sarah had been trying to evidently have a family, but she was barren. She couldn't have children. At the point where we're at now, he's up to like 80-some, 85-ish years old. They even say, well past the years of childbearing. And he's like, how is this possible? That God, you are promising me that my descendants, of whom I have none, are going to inherit this land forever, and it's just going to be this great blessing to us and to the whole nations. It doesn't add up. Yet God still seems keeping these promises on one after the other, after the other. As if this wasn't enough, Abraham's nephew Lot had gone to live nearby, been in another place. He had fallen into some bad company. He had started hanging out with the wrong crowd, and he got involved in a war. He got captured, and Abram hears about this and decides, I have to go save my nephew. So he goes there, he's successful, he saves his nephew. It's a whole disaster, a whole problem. But you add this to the layers of things that are happening, and if you're Abram, you're wondering, God, how is this possible? Promises, promises, and more promises, but I just don't see how it matches. So God comes to him again, and here's what God says. Do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great. I don't know how you would feel, but I imagine if I was Abram, I'd be feeling like, I'm done. I'm done trying to understand, I'm done trying to trust, I'm done trying to feel like this is good news. It just doesn't add up. So, how does Abram respond to the Lord? Here's what he says. O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? See, like we just said, this all hinges on him having descendants. And he has none. And if he doesn't have any, then all these blessings make 0 sense. All these promises will never happen. I love that Abram says what needs to be said. Like, God, this isn't going to work because of this. And he puts it back in God's lap. You promised me this, you promised me all these things, but it doesn't make sense. So what? I love that Abram is honest. And a relationship with God means that we need to be willing to be honest. Honest about how we feel, honest about how we're responding to the things that God says, honest about our situations, honest about what we want, honest about what we don't have, honest about how we don't understand or we do understand, honest about everything. We know that every relationship thrives when we're honest. When we're forthright, when we're truthful, when we're honest. Relationships just work. The same is true for relationship with God. And Abram is honest. And what if we were honest about how we feel with God all the time? God, I am thankful. Thank you for doing this and providing this. God, I am confused. I don't get it, and I need you to help me get it. God, I'm impatient. It's not happening, and I don't want to wait anymore. God, I'm joyful. This is great. Thank you that I could be joyful. I mean, honest in everything. Can God take our honesty? Absolutely. If Abram is an example of anything, he's an example that honesty is a good thing when it comes to a relationship with God. So what does God do with Abram's honesty? I mean, this is a conversation. This is a relationship going on. So what does God do with Abram's honesty? Well, here's how God responds. Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. What did God respond with? Another promise. If we're keeping track, this is at least 7 promises by now that God has made. And does Abram have any evidence that God is going to come through and do any of these promises? As far as we know from the story, not much. But God just keeps adding on the promises, one after another. What is Abram's response here to God's promise? Abram did what? He believed. Do we know why or how? We have no idea. At least reading through this whole story, I have no idea what changed in Abram. Something happened though, because what we do know is Abram now believes that God will be able to do these things. Abram expressed his faith. Abram showed that he believed and trusted that God can do these things that God promises to do. And God made him right in God's eyes. What everybody in Abram's world and after him were trying to achieve was right. Being, living, doing, thinking, acting right. That was the goal. As they lived and progressed in generations, it was even more the goal to be right. And they strived with everything they have. Sometimes, like we strive to just be right. I gotta be right. Who was it who made Abram right? God made Abram right. It wasn't Abram's effort. It wasn't everything that he did. Or we don't even know what all he did. God made Abram right. Because Abram was willing to believe. A relationship sometimes involves us being willing to believe. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it doesn't add up. Sometimes it's not logical. Sometimes we might say something like, I can't not believe. Or I'm just moved to believe. Somehow, God can do some amazing work. Somehow God can move us to believe. And sometimes we just need to be willing to believe that God can do even this when it doesn't always make sense. Now, I'm not a betting person, but if I was a betting person, I would put everything that I own and everything I have on this. The best Old Testament verse to describe everything about the New Testament might be this one verse. The verse that says, Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. That's what Jesus did. He allows us to believe. He steps in to make us righteous when we don't have the capacity to do it. God made Abram righteous in God's sight. Thank God that there are times when it's tough to believe, but God can provide for us to be able to believe that God can even do this. So that's kind of what Abram brought to the relationship. He brought honesty and he brought a willingness to believe. But this is a relationship, and relationships are two-way streets. It wasn't just Abram acting toward God, it was God needing to act toward Abram. So what does God bring to this whole dynamic? It's a little strange, but we can handle it. So let's read on and see. God says to Abram, "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." So Abram presented all these to him and killed them. Then he cut each animal down the middle and laid the halves side by side. That's kind of gross, isn't it? Yes, that's okay. But to Abram, this was quite normal. This is what people did when they made covenants. And actually, they didn't call it making a covenant, they called it cutting a covenant. Kind of like we cut a deal with somebody. I cut a deal with you. They cut a covenant. And that was when they made agreements, these covenant agreements with each other, but they literally cut animals in half. They would cut these animals in half, they would lay them open as part of the whole ritual and procedure of making a covenant agreement with somebody else. Now, why would they do this? Why would cutting animals in half be important? Well, let's read on. Abram fell into a deep sleep. After the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw a smoking firepot and a flaming torch pass between the halves of the carcasses. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day. Are you picturing this in your minds? Yes, this is still quite gross, but this is what they did to make a covenant. They would lay out the animals in a path, and the people making the covenant would walk between the animals, and that was making the covenant. Now, how does that make a covenant? Well, if you walked between two halves of dead animals that are bleeding and open, how would you feel as you saw these animals? Other than, this is disgusting and gross, how would it make you feel? Like, I'm seeing death, I'm seeing carcasses, I'm seeing this awful state. I don't want to end up this way. I don't want to do that. And the act of making a covenant was the act of saying, if I break this covenant, I'm willing to end up like that. So it's walking through the willingness to say, that's what I'm promising, and that's what I'm staking my promise on. I will not become that because I'm going to uphold my covenant. So who's this covenant between? God and Abram. Who walks between the carcasses? Well, we have a flaming fire pot and a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch. Those were kind of universal symbols for God. God always appeared as fire and smoke in the Old Testament. All kinds of different times. This happened over and over in the wilderness and afterward. And people knew this is a symbol for who God is. God appears in these ways all the time. So the smoking fire pot and the flaming torch floating between the cart, this Abram's like, this is God. God is passing between there. But God is the only one who makes the covenant. God's the one who says, I am willing to end up like that if I break my covenant agreement to fulfill these promises for you. That's how important this is. And that's how truthful my word is. So what does God bring to the relationship with us? God brings everything. God is willing to do everything and go all the way for us. Even give God's very own life for us. If there was a verse in the New Testament that explains everything that is in the Old Testament, it could be a verse like this. This is how God loved the world. He gave his only Son so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. It's God doing everything for us, putting everything on the line so that we might have the life, the best life that God has in store for us. So may we bring honesty, may we bring belief, but know that God has already and will always bring everything for us to make this relationship work. Let's pray.